All right, so to finish up where we left off, we were discussing Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and she had, after several marriages, not marriages, what am I saying? After several miscarriages, sorry, wrong word, wrong M word, after several miscarriages with her husband's babies, Robert Browning, she actually gave birth to a son, the son she had with Robert Browning. And they named him Robert Wiedemann Barrett Browning hyphenated, or Penn for short. Interesting nickname, Penn. No, I don't know why they nicknamed him Penn. Is it because they both love to write with a pen? I don't know. I want to know. I gotta look into that. Gives me something to do. All right. Anyway, Elizabeth wrote several sonnets in honor of George Sand, two of which we read for class. And George Sand, as I mentioned before, spelled George Sand, George, and then Sand for the last name, so it looks like a male's name. It was a male pseudonym that the female French writer Aurore Dupin used when she wrote. We read two of these for our class: To George Sand, A Desire, published in 1844, and To George Sand, A Recognition, published in 1844. For cloistered Elizabeth, and by cloistered I mean like sheltered, she keeps to herself, for her to praise the unconventional George Sand so certainly speaks of impulses that later flower in Elizabeth's political activism. And we see that, with her praise, her acting for women's rights, and things like that. Now, George Sand was a baroness by marriage, and so she occupied the uppermost social circles in France. However, many of her actions directly violated the social code that customarily bound her societal class. For instance, George often wore men's clothing in public and used her men's attire to gain access to men's clubs and other places where women were not permitted. She also smoked in public, which wasn't done by women in that social class. She was a writer and wrote under a man's name. So, interestingly, maybe when she chose that male name, it wasn't only because she felt as if she wouldn't be accepted as a female writer. Maybe there was something to her wanting to use a male pseudonym, since she dressed in men's clothing and had many habits that were considered male habits at the time. So there could have been some doing that to access the freedoms that men had, or it could be, we don't know, maybe some of her doing that because she felt as if, that's what she wanted. Maybe, there was some binary genderism going on there. We don't know, but she was married to a man, and had famous love affairs with many men of the time period. So her husband was also a writer, Alfred de Musset, but she also had famous love affairs with the composer, the very famous Polish-French composer Frédéric Chopin, and Jules Sandeau. Possibly even a lesbian affair with Marie Dorval, that's speculated. So there could have been some gender fluidity going on here, as well as sexual fluidity. We don't know. These are speculated based on what we know of her, writings, and documentation of how she conducted herself. So, perhaps Elizabeth's most famous poem, in another one we read for class, is called How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. So you may have heard of that one, right? How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. That is the name of the sonnet, number 18, that we read of hers from a larger work that she wrote called Sonnets from the Portuguese. Now, Sonnets from the Portuguese, she wrote as love poetry for her husband. So it's a series of sonnets that she wrote for her husband, Robert Browning. In fact, the Portuguese, so Sonnets from the Portuguese is Browning's nickname for Elizabeth. So when she writes the title Sonnets from the Portuguese, she means sonnets from your wife, Elizabeth. And that's that special name they used for each other, or that her husband used for her. There's that term of endearment, which makes sense since it's a series of love sonnets that she dedicates to her husband. So have fun reading that too. These sonnets marked another landmark in feminine poetic development, as they used a traditionally male-oriented genre, which was the sonnet, made famous like by Shakespeare. He wrote many sonnets. So do so many other poets, like you've got Petrarch's sonnets, etc. Anyway, they were often used by males. She co-opted that genre, or made it her own, to depict a romance from the female's perspective. Often it's written by men and about the male perspective in a relationship. This she took and made one of the female perspective. And she wrote it towards, and she dedicated those sonnets to a man. So, kind of interesting, right? We've got that flip now. In the footsteps of Afrabain and Mary Roth, who used the traditional male-based pastoral poem and sonnet, respectively, to depict love from the female viewpoint, as we read earlier in our Renaissance times. So, and also, 1600s for Afrabain. Yeah, so enjoy these kind of non-traditional poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. The two about George Sand are written to George Sand, and then the sonnet about her husband, How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways, published in 1850. Alrighty, enjoy Elizabeth Barrett Browning and her poetry.